The phone buzzed persistently in my pocket, pulling me from my focus. Wiping the sweat from my forehead, I stepped outside the makeshift clinic where the midday sun cast long shadows over the rural village. My stomach dropped at the name on the screen. Richard. I almost chose not to answer. After years of facing my stepfather's antics, I knew his calls seldom delivered good news. Yet, curiosity and a hint of hope compelled me to pick up. "Hello," I said, striving for a neutral. "Tom, Catherine, Tom, Catherine." His voice was cheerfully excessive far too cheerful. "I thought you'd want to know I sold the mountain cabin." I froze, clutching the phone tighter. "You did what?" He repeated it as if it were the most ordinary thing. "Sold it." "Don't look so shocked. It's for the greater good mine, obviously." His smug laugh ignited a fury within me. "I'm Catherine, and for as long as I can remember, Richard has been a constant thorn in my side. My mom married him when I was 15, and he quickly ingratiated himself into the family with charm and humor. But beneath that surface lay a man who always prioritized his own needs. The cabin wasn't merely a vacation home. It was my sanctuary, a place where I invested years of love and care. Nestled in the mountains, it was where I recharged after exhausting work trips, hosted friends for long weekends, and found my peace. Hearing Richard discuss it as if it were just a pawn in his endless schemes was infuriating. "You have no right." I stammered, my voice trembling. "That cabin wasn't yours to sell." "Relax." "I've managed things around here while you're off saving the world. Besides, what's the point of holding on to something you never enjoy?" It was an easy way to clear my debts. "You'll thank me later." "I'll thank you when hell freezes over," I snapped, cutting off the call before he could say more. I began pacing, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Richard's audacity knew no limits, but this time he had crossed a line. What he didn't reascend what I intended to keep to myself for now was that the cabin wasn't entirely mine to sell. My best friend, Laura, was and the legal agreement we established years ago required both our signatures for any sale. This wasn't over. I sank onto the edge of my cot, staring at the phone as if it might ignite. My mind raced, replaying Richard's smug tone. How could he think this was acceptable, selling something so personal to me as if it were a trinket to trade for his benefit? The cabin was not just mine. It was a lifeline, a place where I spent summers catching fireflies and hiking with my mom before After her passing, it became my anchor, the one steady thing when everything else fell apart. Richard had no such attachment to him. It was just another resource to exploit. But this was not a minor favor or inconvenience. It was my home. I tapped Laura's name in my contacts, waiting for her to answer. "Hey, Kathy, what's up?" she greeted cheerfully. "Richard sold the cabin," I blurted, unable to contain my anger. A long pause followed on her end. What? Apparently, he needed money to settle some gambling debts, I replied bitterly. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible." "He doesn't have the authority to sell it without your consent," Laura said, letting out a low whistle. "He really thought he could get away with this." "That man has no shame." "None." I agreed. "I'll need your help to sort this out. I'll finish my volunteer assignment and head back home as soon as I can. Can you pull up the legal documents in the meantime?" I want to be prepared to counter this. You got it, Laura replied firmly. We'll take care of this together. As I hung up, a strange calm enveloped me. Richard thought he had outsmarted me, that I was too far away to respond to his betrayal, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't the frightened teenager who let him walk all over me. I was an adult now, equipped with resources, allies, and a solid grasp of the law. If he thought this was over, he was in for a rude awakening. The next few days flew by as I wrapped up my volunteer assignment, trying to keep my emotions in check. Yet, no matter how busy I kept myself, Richard's betrayal lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Late one evening, I sat down with my Janella constant companion on trips. Writing helped me process my feelings, and I needed clarity now more than ever. As I scribbled furiously, memories flooded back. The first time I visited the cabin with my mom. The hours spent restoring it with Laura, the quiet nights by the fireplace when the world felt still. This wasn't just a building, it was a part of me. And Richard thought he could just sell it off like a poker chip. Not this time. The next day, Laura called again, her tone brisk and busy. I went through the co-ownership agreement, she said. You were right. He didn't have the authority to sell without my consent. The sale is invalid. Relief washed over me but was quickly replaced by anger. Do we know who he sold it to? Not yet, Laura replied, but I pulled the county records, and there's no official transfer of ownership. It sounds like he might have tried to do this under the table. That was classic. Richard always looking for shortcuts, always trying to outsmart the system. What's our next step? I asked. Well, we can either confront him directly, Laura suggested, or we can let the legal process handle it. Either way, we're in the clear. He has no legal standing. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thanks, Laura. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, she replied warmly, but I'll always have your back. A plan began to form in my mind. I would finish my work here, return home, and confront Richard. I wouldn't scream or yell. That's what he expected. No, I'd take a different approach. I'd use the one thing he always underestimated, my ability to think ahead. He thought he had won, but by the time I was done, he'd realize he had underestimated me for the last time. When I finally arrived home, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The cabin usually welcomed me with peace, but now that silence felt foreboding. My houseplants were slightly wilted, the mail had piled up by the door, and the fridge was nearly empty. I set my bags down and exhaled, feeling the weight of what I needed to do settle onto my shoulders. Before I could even unpack, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. I considered letting it go to voicemail but decided against it. It was time to face him. Well, if it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter, he greeted, his voice dripping with false cheer. Finally, back to reality, huh? What do you want, Richard? I asked, cutting straight to the point. I just wanted to check in, he said, his tone smug. Make sure you're not too upset about the whole cabin situation. I mean, it's gone now, so there's no use crying over spilled milk. My jaw clenched. Funny you should say that, I replied, maintaining my calm, because as far as I can tell, It's not gone. Laura and I checked the ownership records. The sale didn't go through. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to let me know I'd struck a nerve. That's ridiculous, Richard said, his voice tightening. The buyer paid in cash, and the paperwork is handled. It's a done deal. No, it's not, I countered. Laura and I co-own the cabin, remember, without her consent. The sale is invalid. His laugh was brittle. You think you're so smart, don't you? Always playing the perfect daughter, always trying to control everything. You don't know how hard I've had it, Catherine. I did what I had to do. You stole from me. I shot back. And you think I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? You've made your choices, Richard, and now you'll have to live with them. The conversation ended with him hanging up, leaving me standing there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and triumph. For years, I had allowed Richard to manipulate me, to guilt-trip me, and to take advantage of my patience. But not anymore. I wasn't just defending the cabin. I was reclaiming my boundaries, my voice, and my peace of mind. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the documents Laura had sent me. The co-ownership agreement was crystal clear. Neither of us could sell the cabin without the other's written consent. Richard's actions were not just unethical, they were blatantly illegal. My thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. When I opened it, there stood Richard, wearing his usual smug expression. Mind if I come in? He asked, though he didn't wait for an answer before stepping inside. I folded my arms, watching as he made himself comfortable in one of my chairs. What do you want, Richard? Look, Catherine, he began, his tone condescending. I know you're upset, but you have to understand my position. I was desperate. The people I owed money to weren't exactly patient. I raised an eyebrow, and you thought stealing my property was the solution. Borrowing, he corrected, as if that made it better. I was going to make it back once my luck turned around. I would have paid you back every penny. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Your luck. That's what you're betting on, Richard. You've been gambling away money for as long as I've known you, and it's never worked out. Why would this time be any different? He shifted uncomfortably, but his bravado quickly returned. You're overreacting. It's just a cabin. You're not even here most of the time. Why not let someone else make use of it? Because it's mine, I snapped. Because it's my home. You don't get to decide what I value or what I do with my property. And for the record, Laura values it just as much as I do. Your little sale is invalid, and you know it. His face darkened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear. You wouldn't really go to the authorities, would you? You wouldn't ruin your own stepfather like that. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. Try me. For the first time, Richard didn't have a snappy retort. He stood up, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank back into my chair, my heart racing. The confrontation had left me shaken, but I also felt a spark of satisfaction. Richard was starting to realize that his usual tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about standing up to someone who had taken advantage of me for far too long. After Richard's dramatic exit, I called Laura to update her. He showed up at my house, I said, pacing the living room. Tried to spin some sob story about how he borrowed the cabin to settle his debts. Laura snorted on the other end. Borrowed? Does he even hear himself? Told him the sale was invalid and that if he pushed me, I'd go to the authorities, I replied. That seemed to rattle him a bit. But knowing Richard, he was probably already scheming his next move. Well, let him scheme, Laura said firmly. We've got the law on our side. I've contacted a lawyer to help us draft a formal cease and desist letter. If he tries to involve the buyer again, we'll have a legal paper trail ready to shut it down. I nodded, her words grounding me. Thanks, Laura. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, she said. But we're in this together. In the following days, I focused on gathering all the evidence I could. I documented the co-ownership agreement, collected screenshots of text messages Richard had sent about the sale, and even tracked down the real estate agent involved. When I contacted the agent, her voice was tense. Look, I didn't know the full situation, she said quickly. Richard told me he had permission to sell. If I'd known the cabin had a co-owner, I never would have touched the deal. Well, now you do, I stated, keeping my tone steady. I'm not trying to drag you into this, but I need your cooperation. Can you confirm that Richard signed the paperwork alone? Yes, she admitted. The buyer hasn't paid in full yet because I flagged the transaction as unusual. I can provide you with the documents if you need them. That would be helpful, I said, jotting down her information. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Richard had counted on me being too passive or too distant to fight back, but he was about to learn just how wrong he was. That evening, Laura called with more good news. The letter's ready, she said. We'll send it first thing tomorrow, and if he tries to pull anything else, we'll escalate. Perfect, I replied, a small smile creeping onto my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of the situation. Richard thought he could steamroll me, but he was about to find out I wasn't so easily defeated. The next morning, Laura and I finalized the cease and desist letter and sent it to Richard. The language was clear and unyielding. Any further attempts to claim ownership of the cabin or engage the buyer would result in legal action. I imagined his reaction upon receiving probably a mix of outrage and disbelief. For years, he had manipulated and intimidated people into submission, but this time he was up against a wall. He couldn't charm his way through. Later that day, the real estate agent emailed me the documentation she had promised. Seeing Richard's signature on the fraudulent sale agreement made my stomach churn, but it also solidified my resolve. He hadn't just crossed a line, he had bulldozed over it. That evening, I received a call from Detective Miller, a local officer Laura had contacted to assist with the case. Miss Daniels, he began, his tone professional. I've reviewed the documents. You and Miss Langley provided it's clear the sale was unauthorized. Based on the evidence, we can move forward with a formal investigation if you wish. Yes, I replied without hesitation. I want to pursue this. Detective Miller continued. We'll start by contacting the buyer and explaining the situation. If Richard continues to interfere, we'll escalate to criminal charges for fraudulent misrepresentation. Thank you, Detective, I said. Please let me know if you need anything else from me. As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. The next day, Reacher called, his voice laced with anger but underlined by desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Catherine?" he demanded. "You're ruining everything." "No, Richard," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting what's mine. You did this to yourself. You've always been so ungrateful." He sneered. "I stepped in when your mom couldn't handle things, and this is how you repay me." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "You didn't step in, Richard. You took over. You manipulated, lied, and used people to get what you wanted, and now you're paying the price." He started to argue, but I cut him off. "This conversation is over. If you have anything else to say, take it up with my lawyer." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. Richard's days of pushing me around were over, and I was finally in control. 2 days later, Detective Miller called me with an update. "Ms. Daniels, we've spoken with the buyer, and they've agreed to halt the transaction. They were unaware of the co-ownership agreement and are willing to cooperate with any further investigation." Relief flooded through me. That's great news. "Does this mean the sale is officially voided?" "Yes," he confirmed. "The cabin remains under your and Ms. Langley's ownership. However, we'll need to keep the case open to address your stepfather's fraudulent actions. Do you wish to press charges?" I hesitated for only a moment. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want him held accountable." "Understood," Detective Miller replied. "We'll proceed accordingly. Thank you for your cooperation." After the call, I let out a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt the sense of calm returning. The cabin was safe, and Richard's schemes were unraveling. Later that afternoon, I called Laura to share the news. The sale is officially void. I told her the buyer's backing out and the cabin is ours again. "That's a huge win," Laura exclaimed, her excitement evident. "But what about Richard?" "The police are moving forward with their investigation," I explained. "He's not getting away with this." "Good," she said. "It's about time someone stood up to him." Her words lingered with me long after we hung up. For years, I had let Richard get away with so much: his manipulations, his entitlement, his complete disregard for boundaries. But this time, I had fought back, and it felt like a turning point, not just for this situation, but for how I approached everything in my life. That evening, I visited the cabin for the first time since returning home. Stepping inside, I was overwhelmed by emotion. The scent of the wood panels and the familiar creak of the floorboards reminded me why this place meant so much to me. I settled by the fireplace, allowing the quiet of the mountains to wash over me. This was my Havanda place, where I built memories, celebrated milestones, and found peace amid life's chaos, and it was still mine. No thanks to Richard. For the first time, I allowed myself to smile. I wasn't just reclaiming a property. I was reclaiming a part of myself. A week later, Detective Miller called with the final update. "Miss Daniels, I wanted to let you know that your stepfather has been formally charged with fraudulent misrepresentation, and